Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our event. We are just waiting for a few more participants to join and we will be live very shortly. As you can see, there is a Q&A session, so please do feel free to post any questions or comments over there. Microsoft likes to share its best practices, so if you're interested, please do check our code of conduct out at microsoftreactor.com. I'll quickly walk you through the event guidelines for today. So will there be a video? Yes, this event will be recorded, but participants will not appear in the video. Are there any questions? Yes, please do submit your questions. They're very much encouraged in the Q&A at the top right of your screen. We will have a Q&A session at the end. Will there be closed captioning? Yes, it is available. And to turn it on, please click on the CC or live captioning icon at the bottom of your screen and select your preference, available in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. The agenda for today will be composed of 5 items. The first event being the institutional opening with Carlos Pinto, which is the country manager for the IFC, and Franklin Luzich, the Vice President of Innovation, Transformation, and New Businesses at Microsoft Brazil. The second item on the agenda will be ESG and Diversity for Startups. Myself, I will be speaking for We Ventures as the Chief Investment Officer. The third item will be Why Sustainability Matters with Martine Valsan, the Global Manager for Corporate Governance, ESG Advisory, Knowledge and Learning in the ESG Advice and Solutions Department of the IFC. Item 4 will be What Sustainability Means to You with Gladys Ribeiro, Senior Environmental and Social Specialist for the IFC. And lastly, we'll have our Q&A section. We'll now head for the institutional opening with Carlos Pinto, Country Manager for Brazil IFC, and Franklin Luzich, the Vice President of Innovation, Transformation, and New Businesses at Microsoft Brazil.
Please, Carlos, please start.
Thank you, Franklin. Thank you, Marcela. So first of all, I would like to greet the audience here today and thank you for accepting this invitation. For those of you that don't know IFC, so this is an institution member of the World Bank Group, the largest global development institution focused on the private sector in emerging countries. Brazil is the country that holds our 4th largest portfolio, where in fiscal year 20, we invested nearly $2.2 billion here in Brazil. Our investments are directed at multiple sectors, but most importantly, they are guided by our commitment to the creation of sustainable and inclusive markets. Inclusiveness call for diversity and gender equality is certainly one of our priorities on that matter. IFC has provided financing and expertise to an extensive network of financial institutions to help them acquire women-owned SMEs and retail customers, increasing access to finance to thousands of companies led by women and promoting inclusive economic growth. One example here in Brazil is the Programa Mulher Empreendedora, a project developed in partnership with Banco Itaú. In our view, gender equality is key to economic growth and higher productivity. With this in mind, IFC established this partnership with Microsoft to foster female entrepreneurship and increase inclusion and employability of forcibly displaced population in the tech sector here in Brazil. So our venture capital team has an important role in our investments in disruptive technologies, and the experience shows that opportunities in the tech space have been historically asymmetrical between men and women, especially when it comes to access to capital and network. This partnership aims precisely to reduce the gaps that hinder the growth of tech companies led by women, in addition to increase opportunities to forcibly displace populations in the tech space. So our partnership begins today with this workshop because in IFC's view, corporate governance and correct assessment on environmental and social risks should be shared practices as they are necessary to create sustainable and inclusive markets with development opportunities for all. So having said that, to conclude, I would like to thank our partners on this initiative, Microsoft Brazil, and especially my dear friend Franklin for his bold vision and strong commitment. Thank you so much and enjoy the session. Franklin, over to you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to this day come because we are dreaming to have this partnership between Microsoft and IFC for so long. So I'm very happy to achieve this goal. I truly believe that it's going to be an initial step to a robust partnership in the future. I believe also that we are doing a very important project to address a very bad scenario because only 2% of the female founders receive investments from venture capitalists. So this has a strong correlation with Microsoft's mission to empower everybody, every person and every organization to achieve more. So I truly believe that we can do our part to help women startups to achieve more. That's our goal with this project, and not only to foster women entrepreneurship, but also the training, because we are also thinking into improving technical skilling skills for the woman entrepreneurs. So that's for us very important to increase the impact in Brazil, increase employability in Brazil, and of course helping to address this economic scenario that we are facing due to the COVID-19. So with that, I will hand over to Marcela, and thank you all for this partnership. Thank you so much, Carlos, for believing in us and the IFC team to taking part of this, and we, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franklin. We will now move to the second item in our agenda, ESG and Diversity for Startups. I am the head and chief investment officers of We Ventures. And I'll try to make this as brief as possible and hand you over immediately to the experts. But speaking briefly of ESG and diversity, what does this stand for and how are they related? Our brief presentation is just going to focus on answering the main questions. How can we connect ESG to diversity? And how important is it to see environmental, social, and governance matters through the lens of gender, race, national origin, culture, other groups when making business decisions? So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And this has been exponentially used to get transparency to companies' practices and outcomes. So working through the incorporation of these factors when making a performance analysis. Environmental. So let's speak of the first pillar. This mostly includes sustainability issues, so including greenhouse gases emissions, renewable energy, waste management, all these things, and how the companies report these issues regarding sustainability matters in the environment. The social pillar. Social pillar brings transparency to the company's ethical reputation, to the employee relations, to human rights, to gender equity practices, corporate social responsibility practices. So this is a very important transparency in the social aspect we see. And governance, the final third pillar, brings transparency to ethics and compliance, board procedures, dynamics. So looking at fostering a more sustainable society, it is key to foster inclusion into this equation. And how do we do that? Through this D&I perspective, right? So when looking through the D&I perspective, through the diversity perspective into environmental matters, we boost a stronger commitment to sustainability. We boost a stronger commitment to reduction in environmentally related problems, a stronger attention to the triple bottom line of the planet, right? People, planet, and profit. That's very strong in this pillar of the environment. Through the D&I perspective, the social pillar, what do we bring? We bring gender equitable hiring and promotion processes. We bring improved corporate social responsibility. We bring higher community engagement. We improve human rights and ethical conducts and reputations in companies. So that's also extremely essential. And in the final pillar, through the diversity perspective, we experience better returns. We experience reduced risks of security frauds, tighter internal controls, more active board meetings, increased willingness to replace underperforming CEOs, more transparency and disclosure. So this has been proven. There are diverse researches in Harvard and Stanford that show that more diverse companies are actually more lucrative, that the presence of diversity in boards actually promotes products that have a better fit with the market and therefore make companies that are more profitable. So this is an absolute must for boards and for leaderships today. Just bringing over gender gap in numbers very quickly, as Franklin very wisely mentioned, we are here to combat a gender gap in women in technology and venture capital. Women have only received 2% of global venture capital dollars. That's very low. That's alarmingly low, even though companies founded by women have faster exits and are more lucrative. That has also been proven in data. So additionally to that, there are data that indicates that the inclusion of women in the economy will represent a growth in the global GDP from $2 to $6 trillion. So that's economic development for everyone, for women and for men. And that's what we're here to fight. There are currently opportunity gaps, payment gaps, investment gaps, funding gaps. We women at venture capital leadership positions are only 8 to 9% worldwide. So that's what we combat here daily, and bringing this very important lens, gender lens, into investments is the way we will be able to change this scenario. So who we are We Ventures, the first fund in Latin America, 100% dedicated to developing women founders in our ecosystem. We invest in startups with at least one woman in the founding team, and this woman has to have a leadership position. And our goal is ultimately to balance female representativity and resilient technology. We have a very strong ESG pillar. We do have a impact proposal, but we are an investment fund. We aim returns while being aligned with 5 of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. I will now hand over to the experts. Finally, we will have Martine Valsan speaking why sustainability matters. She is the Global Manager, Corporate Governance and ESG Advisory, Knowledge and Learning in the ESG Advice and Solutions Department at the EFC. Martine?
Hi, thank you, Marcella, and thank you for that great introduction, and thank you for having us today speaking at this event. During my presentation, I will do a few things. First, I will explain why sustainability is important to your business. Then I will focus, as I'm a corporate governance expert, on the G in the ESG, and focus on some of the key governance risks that startup businesses and small and medium enterprises face specifically, and offer some good practice that can be adopted in order to mitigate those risks. And I will then conclude my presentation on talking about diversity and why it matters and how you can incorporate this at your business. So the message I want to leave you today with, it's never too early to start thinking about sustainability and corporate governance at the get-go of your business. Next slide, please. So Marcella did a very good job of providing examples of what ESG means. And the term sustainability and ESG, for the purposes of this presentation, we'll be using them interchangeably, but there are some differences between the two concepts. Often people refer to sustainability in respect to environmental matters, such as climate change. But that term can also refer to what it takes to make an enterprise to achieve long-term existence, profitability, and growth. So ESG is at the center of enabling sustainable business practices. From a business perspective, sustainability means focusing on long-term value creation. So now what we're seeing in the market is a shift from the tunnel vision of short-term shareholder value creation towards a more comprehensive 360-degree view of all stakeholders, which includes shareholders, employees, customers, suppliers, and communities in which companies operate. Not to mention the future generations that deserve to inherit a clean and stable environment. Harvard Business Review calls this a transition from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. There's been a number of studies looking at the relationship between a company's ESG practices and their financial performance, and the vast majority of them do find a direct link. Companies that do good by the environment, the labor force, and communities do well financially. IFC recently looked at the performance of more than 600 companies in its portfolio and found that companies with good E&S performance tend to outperform clients with worse E&S performance, and on two fronts, by more than 200 basis points in terms on return of equity and 100 basis points on return on assets. Also, we can not forget to mention that the COVID pandemic has acted as a catalyst, accelerating the idea that companies must embrace sustainable business practices, taking account their responsibilities to all stakeholders if they are to be resilient in the long term. In terms of investor interests, investors are flocking to sustainable companies. Funds that invest in or adopt strategies related to clean energy, climate change, and ESG have increased their asset under management by 32% last year, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. And sustainable investment are performing their non-sustainable counterparts. The FTSE index of environmental friendly equities is up 35% in 2020, more than 20 percentage points above global equity indices. ESG investment outperformance is also present in emerging markets, where the MSCI Emerging Markets ESG Leaders Index has outperformed the broader MSCI Emerging Market Index by a considerable margin since 2008. We can go to the next slide, please, Marcella. So now I'll focus more on the corporate governance, on the G of the ESG. So what is corporate governance? I mean, generally speaking, we talk about corporate governance as the structures and processes by which companies are controlled and governed. Generally speaking, good corporate governance practices help companies operate more efficiently, improve access to capital, mitigate risks, and safeguard against mismanagement. It makes companies more accountable and transparent to investors and gives them the tools to respond to stakeholder concerns. To survive and grow, all businesses need to be properly managed. Under the traditional corporate governance model, shareholders own the asset, provide the capital to the business, and appoint the board to oversee the business. The board then sets strategic direction, supervises the performance of management, and reports to shareholders on its stewardship. And management uses the assets and the capital provided by shareholders to realize the positive return and reports on its performance to the board. Increasingly, good governance also includes active engagement with other stakeholders, so the suppliers, the clients, employees, and the communities in which your business operates. In practice, as a startup, governance challenges involve decision-making, strategic oversight, recruitment and retention of qualified management and staff, succession planning, and the establishment of standardized internal control mechanisms and practices. These challenges stem from the very nature of SMEs, which typically experience organic growth, and more often than not, the systems, policies, and processes required for the proper governance of the business lag behind. This organic growth, combined with the ambiguity in business roles, with key personnel wearing multiple hats, for example, also an informal approach to business, which may also involve family involvement at various levels, is unsustainable in the long term. So that's why you have to think about corporate governance, even at the startup level. What happens is that SME business owners often delay improving governance until some point in the future when they're big enough to do so. As a result, the businesses miss out on key opportunities and solutions that could improve competitive survival and growth. Also, delaying implementation of governance until the business is large and fully formed can mean that implementation, when it does come, the business may find this particularly painful and disruptive. Let's go to the next slide, please, Marcella. So in terms of specific challenges that startups face, I would put them in two categories: risk for the enterprise, and also I put myself in the shoes of the risk as a potential investor in a startup. So what are the risks that we're seeing as a potential investor? You know, again, as a startup, SMEs are focused on product development, on testing the markets. With very single-minded focus and limited resources, SMEs typically put little effort in organizational development. At this stage, operations are fairly straightforward and simple, encouraging an informal and agile approach to managing them. And so the principal risks that are faced at the enterprise level is often due to the informal nature of the SME at this stage, which and there's two ways to see this. On the one hand, you can rush to implement rules, systems, and procedures that can inadvertently slow the company's product development and agility. Premature moves to do too much delegating may lead to the founder's loss of control. On the other extreme, a complete refusal or inability to start delegating may lead a founder to not make good use of its managerial and technical talents. There is also a risk that the founder will not communicate effectively, leading to information gaps in the team. At this stage as well, companies often have long-term investment goals, but short-term financing capabilities, which can spread cash and resources too thinly and increase uncertainty. So again, I'll provide some tips, but you need to strike the proper balance between doing too much or too little as a startup. And from the investor's perspective, there's a concern that startups don't have in place the most basic systems and policies. Related to this is the risk that founders are making all the decisions and aren't seeking advice on business strategy from a third party or even internally. Over-reliance on the founder creates a big key person risk. Another factor is mixing of family and business interests. This brings an increased emotional component and tends to result in lack of clarity or transparency in decision-making, especially in financial matters. So if we go to the next slide, let's look at some areas that you can focus on to mitigate this risk as a startup. There will be 5 of them. The first one is culture and commitment to good governance. And again, we're talking about a startup, not a listed company, simple things that people should keep in mind and as good practice. So the SME owner at this point should demonstrate that corporate governance is important and integral to the company's sustainable development. And there's several ways that you can do so. First is by officially registering the business with the proper authorities as a company or sole entrepreneurship, and to ensure separation of the business from the person. You can adopt articles of association and any other relevant policy deemed necessary to produce a minimum structure to regulate the distribution of tasks. Also, at this point, you can identify core business functions and distribute them among your multitasking teams. At this initial stage, the company is of course too small to have separate departments or divisions, but it's nonetheless important to identify core business functions that need to be managed, such as finance, HR, marketing, and administration. Assigning responsibility to these functions to the team members increases accountability and facilitates clear communication. You can also formalize some governance provisions with the participation of shareholders and stakeholders. That could include provisions in articles of association or shareholder agreements. The second area of focus can be decision-making and strategic oversight. And specifically in terms of management decision-making, it's important to conduct individual consultation with key executives before making major decisions. You can also define and communicate authority limits of for key personnel. For example, what amounts of purchases that would require CEO authorization. At this point, it's also good practice to start either forming an advisory board or, have yourself, some trusted advisors that you can engage with to engage on this, to discuss strategic issues. The third area where work can be done is around risk governance and internal controls. Internal controls should be adopted to ensure that at a minimum, the company complies with main laws and regulations. You don't want to be in a situation where you're not, abiding by the laws. But also as a startup, you need to focus in particular on the area of working capital and cash flow management. So for example, have separate cash sources and bank accounts of the company and those of the founders. So you need this to be separate. You also need to routinely monitor and analyze cash flow in order to effectively plan for your needs and financing needs. And also it's good practice to do a basic valuation exercise just to have an idea of the net value of your business. The fourth area is around disclosure and transparency. And at this point, we'll focus on financial disclosure. So it's good to prepare basic financial accounts and use this information consistently for registration, reporting, and other purposes. Consistency in maintaining such financial records is important to potential investors and funding institutions because it allows them to better evaluate the business performance and future growth potential. And fifth, everything that relates to ownership. So you're going to be, you're a founder of a company. Your family members may have also a role in the business. So it's important to define the role that the founders will have in the company operations. And it's important to do so in respect to your staff. And if there are family members involved, you need to make sure that it is clear what their role is in the business and communicate this as well to company employees. You may also need to consider if you have family members who will be shareholders, an exit mechanism for them to exit the business without it being disruptive to the business. And finally, I would say that another good practice to think about a startup is to also think about potential problems that can happen. So for example, having a shareholder dispute resolution mechanism embedded in the shareholder agreement or the article of incorporation is also good practice. Next slide. Marcella, next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Perfect. So as Marcella mentioned, there is a strong business case for diversity, and it's a big area of focus for us at IFC. And I think in Brazil, we were able to gather some information around, gender, business, and the startups. So apparently, from what I understand, there's more than 1.3 million women that are in charge in businesses in Brazil. And that represents a third of all entrepreneurs, either formal and informally. And in terms of the startups that were mapped by the company called Distrito in Brazil, about a third of the 12,000 startups have women as part of the corporate structure in the role of founders, employees with shares, or investors. So that's not much. In addition, about 2/3 of startup companies only have men as partners, and about 8% have a corporate structure formed strictly by women. And in the fintech industry in Brazil, the scenario is similar. More than 90% of entrepreneurs are men and about 7% women, according to the Brazilian Association of Fintechs in partnership with PwC. So at IFC, we have a strong focus on advancing women in business leadership. There has been progress in gender equality, but studies shows that female talent is among the least utilized of economic and business resources around the world. A significant and growing number of studies point to the benefits associated with gender diversity on boards and in senior management, including increased financial performance and productivity, as well as improved ESG practices. Yet, women remain underrepresented. Worldwide, women hold only 17% of all the board seats, 5% of board chaired positions, only 4% of CEOs, and 12% of CFO positions. And, you know, at the investor level, there's an increased focus on gender diversity and responsible investing. Investors, including managers and private equity firms, have more of an incentive than ever to push for gender diversities, as companies that promote gender balance have produced better return on equity, returns on total asset, price to earning ratio, net internal rate of returns, and valuations in both public and private capital markets. According to a 2019 IFC study, 11% of senior management investment professionals in emerging private equities and venture capital are women, which is comparable to the 10% observed in developed markets. For portfolio companies, emerging market female entrepreneurs receive about 7% of investment capital. The same study, interestingly, indicates that when women are represented as investors, women-led business get more funding. While only 7% of deals done by male investment partners were in women-led business, but for female partners, it is almost twice as much at 12%. So as a startup, what should you think about in terms of promoting gender diversity, right? You should be thinking about increased female representation in the business, especially leadership positions, about policies that promote equal pay for equal work, family leave and flexible work options, and also making sure you have a sexual harassment-free workplace. As mentioned previously as part of the best practice, you know, when you tap into your external, you're building your external, you know, advisory board or your network of advisors, you should ensure to tap into a diversified network of external advisors, which is gender balanced and racially diverse, and representative of the stakeholder groups targeted by your business. Sometimes it's not easy to do so. It means going deeper in your network, building those connections, and seek out those women that have a lot of value to bring to the business. To conclude, what I would like to say is that it's never too early to start thinking about sustainability, about corporate governance, and about diversity as you are starting your business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martine. This was amazing content. We will now move on to the next item in our agenda, what sustainability means to you. With Gladys Ribeiro, she's the Senior Environmental and Social Specialist with the IFC.
Hi, everyone. This is a pleasure. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Martine, for this amazing presentation. And I think you all must be really asking yourselves now what sustainability means to us and what challenges and opportunities I have in my business. So firstly, I would like to present this first chart. Marcela, please, can you? Thank you. So it's clear that tech companies have proved to be a huge success in Wall Street. Not looking at NASDAQ, looking at the SP 500, you can see this exponential growth and the expectation that this will continue. And as we continue to the next slide, you can see the rationale for this. The expectations are really high. Compound annual growth is expected to remain above 17%, with a large volume of capital being directed to this sector. So in the next slide, I would like to show you a bit of what ESG could bring to you in terms of value added and risk mitigation. But this slide is very interesting because it shows the roadmap through the investment profile. So you can see that you have financial only businesses, responsible business, sustainable business, and impact business. And as you progress, you see that there are investors that are looking at businesses only through the financial lenses. but more and more investors are looking at possible investments through the responsible lens. And for this, you have to start thinking about what are the risks involved in your business, what are the inherent traits of your business that may represent additionality in terms of E&S, or even when your E&S represents an additionality, when you go to sectors that can really represent reduction in terms of emissions, in terms of use of energy, water, resources in general. So this is quite important as you progress, because you leave the position in which you are mitigating E&S, and you are pursuing E&S as an opportunity. And sometimes impact investment translates it all into a focus of business. We've been seeing quite a lot of business investing in regions that are very poor and focusing on impact investments in those regions, and bringing a lot of value and interest from investors. I want to highlight a very important point made by Martin, that corporate governance is really a must-do. If you want to attract capital, you will have to have a governance and think about what are your missions, your strategy, and how you're going to deliver them. This is very, very important, and you may have to start with the governance bit of your assessment and then progress into E&S, but they are not excludants. Governance is always the most important thing. If you are to be listed publicly, or if you want in the future to make an IPO in your company, corporate governance will be the most material item. I also would like to draw the attention for opportunities that derive from the nature of your business. Sometimes you are in sectors that are very much represent very much an additionality in terms of environment and social practices. So you can yourself in a health or education business be called an impact operation and create KPIs and follow up this additionality. And this is quite important. So as we progress to the next slide, you should be asking, okay, I got it. I understand that I have to do my corporate governance work, that I have to understand what are my E&S of opportunities, but how do I go about the risks? So I bring this chart to show you one angle of risks that you may encounter. So this is basically local and global reach versus the availability of high-skilled human resources, or the need of high skills resources or lower skills. So when you have a startup based in Brazil that is focused on the Brazilian market and has no need of high-skilled employees, you have firstly the reference of the national law and the legal all regulations as a benchmark, and you have to create a safety net for those workers. As you progress to regional or global reach, it can become more complicated as you don't have a benchmark as a national law or a regional practice. So you have to look for international good practices. And this may lead you to to us, IFC, we have been working in global spaces. We work in all regions, and we have developed a methodology that can be implemented and can really have very important takes for your business. As we progress to the next slide, I wanted to present a few items that are now considered to be risks. And as you structure a corporate governance and start mapping the potential E&S risks associated to your operation, you may encounter workers' rights challenges, data collection challenges, harassment challenges, and those three items are very high on the list of risks to be addressed by startups and tech companies. Workers' rights are more and more being on the loop throughout the investors' calendars, and they are really looking into this as a potential risk. So formalizing and understanding how will be your relation with your employees is quite important. The other theme that appears frequently is the data collection, as third parties are usually the main source of staff. In general, staff is really uncomfortable with the potential of data collection and profiling of himself and the barriers that this can create. So having clearly established rules for workers' rights, for third-party contractors' rights, data collection, and a strong system and policy against harassment could really represent a lot of value to you. Another item high on the list you will see in the next slide. Marcela, please. Which is safety. And when we were looking at that map of risks, when we look down on the lower skilled potential contractors, this is the area in which we have a lot to develop. So when we're working with tech companies that have logistics focus, for instance, what kind of agreement you have with the third-party contractors that do your business? Do you have any benefits? How safe are they? Do they have any access to premises? So this is quite important, and you may not, and you may structure this in a manner that it could be a much better practice. Those are all emerging subjects within the tech industry, and I think that having those items high on your list and knowing what you're going to do about them, it's quite important. Of course, you may be a tech platform that is focused on financing or supporting some sectors of the economy like agribusiness, and these might bring you additional risks to be assessed, like biodiversity, property of land, indigenous peoples, but this comes at a later stage, as an advice for a startup and a company that is launching its operation. It's very important, and being mindful of inherent risks and what you're doing about your safety net and your direct contractors, and how you structure your company in regards to governance. And finally, I would like to draw your attention to our resources at IFC. In the next slide, we have built a methodology that is really applicable to all sectors. For the tech industry, I would draw your attention mostly to risk management and labor. There are other items that could be present in the resource efficiency and community, which are the performance standards 3 and 4. But focusing in the first two ones would give you a whole view of what ESG represents to you. In the next slide, I'll leave you with the website, and I think that looking through this, you will have a much better view and much better understanding of what ESG means to you. Thank you so much. Hope this has been helpful.
Thank you very much, Gladys. We will now move on to the Q&A section of our event.
Marcela, I believe I saw a question on the SDGs. Did you want me to address that in the Q&A? Is that the way you want to do this?
Yes, absolutely. I am opening the questions right now.
Oh, okay, got it.
But if you'd like to start off.
Yes, I like that question around the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think what I want to say is that, you know, one of the last slides that Gladys showed was the 8 environmental and social performance standards of IFC. And for the corporate governance, what we have is what we call the corporate governance methodology. And there's 6 dimensions, which include, for example, board composition, internal controls, and also governance of stakeholders. And what we did is we mapped the requirements of both the CG, corporate governance methodology, and the ENS performance standards, and they map to 16 out of the 17 sustainable development goals. So the message, the key takeaway is that, you know, IFC's framework, ESG framework, when you put together corporate governance and ENS, do map to the sustainable development goals. So by having those sustainable business practices, you're actually actively contributing to the achievement of the SDGs. So I hope that that answers the question.
Thank you, Martin. I believe it does. We have a question here from Francisco. He says, very good panel, congratulations. A question on the IFC ES governance approach aiming at startups. I understand the sooner the better from the planning, but in a hub, venture or incubation position, selecting those startups, how would you approach it considering TRL or startup stage?
Well, I would really approach this opportunity from the corporate governance side first. I think that it's the corporate governance is structuring, and through the risk analysis, you can really map even ENS inherit risks, and it's a perfect exercise to start with. I think that as your business grows and as your products and deliverables get more material and you understand what are the risks involved in all its production, then you will be able to map additional ENS risks. But I would say that the first task is to get your corporate governance straight.
Yes, and if I may, I would also add in terms of, setting up the right level of corporate governance and ENS risk, I think at the get-go, you need to identify what is material to your business, right? I think the issue of materiality is an important one, because you can have a whole host of issues that could arise as risk, but you need to think about it through the lens of risk that, if they happen, will really derail your business or make your business plan, irrelevant. And typically, in my experience, there's probably, as you grow in this business, 3 to 5 of those risks. Like, you should not have 20, ENS risks to mitigate for your business. You should really focus on materiality. And there's a whole bunch of different frameworks and tools that you can use to help you, from an industry perspective, map some of those material ENS risks and factors.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the information. We have another question here. Do you believe that affirmative actions add value to booster diversity to companies?
I think it's important for companies to adopt policies that are conducive to having a diversity in their companies. I think each jurisdiction and countries have their particular challenges, and they may decide to deal with those challenges through legislation or otherwise. From our perspective, the importance is to look at it from the company perspective and see how practices are either hindering diversity, and to make sure, for example, that you go beyond your regular network if you are looking for to hire new people. I was talking as well, when you have, as a startup, you may have an informal network of business advisors, and you're making sure that is very much diverse as well, from a gender and also from a racial perspective, as I understand is the case probably in Brazil. So there are different ways to get at it. And again, at the end of the day, it's the result that counts more than the manner in which it can be achieved.
I just wanted to add to what Martini has just said, the fact that we really, on top of affirmative actions and the establishing of quotas, as we've seen in Brazil, we have to establish a structure in the company. What we have seen is that sometimes companies have quotas, have established structure, but don't have mentors available to push through and show the way to young women. So in many cases, in addition to affirmative actions, you have to establish some sort of structure to make this happen.
That's absolutely fantastic. We do much of that here, because we often hear from entrepreneurs that affirmative actions or certain policies are too expensive for startup companies at their stage. And we really do put a lot of time and thought into building a mentor network that does that for our entrepreneurs. So it's good to hear that you guys share that opinion as well. I've got 2 more questions here. In the tech and startup space, social media is fundamental in highlighting and promoting your business. How can we connect those 2 topics, social media and ESG, in a positive and efficient way?
Well, I think that understanding your business and your inherent traits that can really add to your ESG performance and make them transparent and make them accessible, because sometimes what we see is that companies may have jewels in the in their drawers, but they're not showing them. They're not showing the positive impact and the additionality. So you have to really showcase what you have and what you can do. The only restriction that I would put in this in the interaction with social media is that you have to have very, realistic and present data and present yourself in a very transparent way, in a way that that can be proved, because we've seen a lot lately that made all the social media opportunity become questionable.
And maybe to add, going beyond the issue of social media, I think disclosure and transparency is key, right? And typically companies that do a good job of disclosing and being transparent about their ESG practices do better financially. We have transparency and disclosure toolkit that can help, companies disclose, first of all, doing the mapping exercise, the materiality mapping, being able to providing examples as to what are the best disclosure practices in respect to ESG. So I strongly encourage you to consult our webpage, Disclosure and Transparency Resources at IFC. That will be very helpful, I believe.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Martine and Gladys. I'll have time to entertain a couple more questions, but we are almost running out of time. So, hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for the presentation. Do you know any technology that helps companies to track its ESG impact on the society? And just a reminder to everybody who's watching, this video will be made available to you later on. So all the material and all of the panels will be available for further reference at the Reactor website.
Well, I can say that there are many companies working in this space. We have a lot of GIS materials and GIS tools available. So it's evolving, and there's a lot going on. And if you go to our sustainability side, you can have a view of projects we've been doing and, innovation happening on mapping and assessing and mitigating ENS risks.
That's fantastic. Unfortunately, we have reached our time limit. So I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. Thank you to our experts, to Franklin at Microsoft, Gladys, Martine, Carlos, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone in the audience. And as I said, the material will be available to you for further reference on those links. And please share to post any comments and any additional questions you have. We'll be happy to answer them. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for being there. You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.